Oh
didn't say
no.
recording.
Yeah,
Yep.
okay, now it's back.
That is a very important part. I had that happen a couple
That
times.
was
So
professional.
yeah, like that's why like
That's
it's
why.
important to have an engineer because that happened before to me before, but I was lucky and I have a backup. That happened a couple of times. So even in the studio. So like it's like a paranoid thing for me now. Like every time I know like I have to record something, I will look at the red button. The red button is very important. You know, even
Wow,
in on traffic lights too.
good to have an audio engineer, a professional audio engineer. Wow.
Yeah, because it's imagine you go for half an hour and then you're like, ah, crap, I didn't record any of those. You know,
Yeah.
that happened before. So, but
Oh,
anyway, so yeah, so I feel my interview. No, I didn't feel my interview. I got fired,
awesome.
and I
Yeah.
didn't. Yeah, and then I didn't do anything for a few months. I have to make sure I get my visas. So I found a studio. They they were run by they are doing pretty well. Like there wasn't like awful. You know, they were doing pretty well, but it wasn't that well organized. And then I know I can bring something to the studio. So they look at my resume, they saw what I did. They're like, yeah, sure, we'll have you for a couple of weeks and see how it turns out. So when I started interning, you know, I do all this as that same thing. I bring water and make sure if my call time was at 12 o'clock, I make sure I come in at least half an hour earlier. You have to make sure you, because in audio industry, in the saying goes, if you're early, you're on time. If you're on time, you're late. If you're late, you are late.
Mm,
So uh, I always make sure I'm half an hour earlier, and
mhm,
also I have to take subway. You never
mm,
know how that, you know, it was. I live like half an hour away from the studio, so you never know how fast you're gonna be there or what's gonna happen in the subway. So I always make sure that I have enough leeway to get to the studio. So I get to the studio, I'll make sure everything is set up beforehand. Like make sure everyone has water. That's very important, and then make sure everyone's taken care of. And then after the sessions end, I usually would talk to the engineer like, oh, why you do this? What did you do? Why you connect this to this? What sort of trick, creative trick that you use to make someone sounds good?
yeah.
And yeah, so I would do that. And then it's fortunate enough that the studio that I intern has a pretty large console. So console or the mixer is like it's almost like a desk, has a bunch of knob on there,
Mm,
a bunch of faders, that you sort of have to learn how to use a machine. It's sort of like a machine, I would call it a machine or console, to make sure everything sounds good, or at least you
mm,
get a signal. And then on the side of the console, in the room, usually have what we call a patch bay. Patch bay is uh, it's something that, let's say if I have like 5 outboard gear, like 5 external gear that I want to connect to the console, I
yeah.
will use a patch cable. It's like a cable that I
Mm,
will plug into a patch bay, and then I will on the other end of the connector, I will plug it into the console on the patch bay. It's like the telephone system back in the 60s or 80s. I don't even remember when the phone invented, but essentially it's like the operator patching you to like other people. You know, it's definitely not our time. It's definitely way before our time. So it's that kind of system, and then it takes time to learn because the studio that I work at, they have stuff labeled, but not everything labeled. So every time when the sessions end,
mm,
I would stay in the studio until like 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning
mm,
to figure out how everything works, how where everything goes, and then if something is not working, I will try to figure out why is it not working, and let me try to make it work. Essentially, the studio get, you know, more than what they have, you know, because like I managed to fix some of the stuff. I
yeah.
managed to like come up with a system,
Mm,
like a sheet or something. Like if you want to come in, you want to use this, you want to use the room, fill this out, let me know what you need so I can come out
mm.
earlier, make sure everything is done. When you walk in, you can just check everything and and then we can go to go. So the pre-productions and pre-planning is very important in anything. So essentially, they're like, we like what you did, we like what you do, and then they're like, yeah, we will hire you as an assistant engineer. Assistant engineer, not engineer yet. Assistant engineer. So as an assistant engineer, you have more of a responsibility. You know, you have to make sure you have to, on top of taking care of everything from water to everything else, you have to break down. You have a little bit more of a creative control. Like, let's say they'll ask you, what microphone should I use, or what type of thing that I should do, or they will just throw very vague things like, hey, I'm doing a podcast, just set up 2 mics. You don't know what 2 mics you're going to use. So as an assistant engineer, you know exactly what 2 mics you will want to use, because you have some creative control. You work in the industry long enough to know what microphone is suitable. You just throw them up. If they want to swap it out, they will swap it out. Yeah, so I have a little bit more control. And then as an assistant engineer, you will be in the room all the time now. So I get to work closely with the engineer. And I was fortunate enough, my mentor, Ryan Kelly, is still my good friend to this day. He picked me up as an assistant engineer. So I didn't, other than working for the studio, I started working for Ryan as well. So he was like, well, I live in Jersey, it's an hour away, but if you want to come out here, feel free. I'm like, sure, 1, more money, 2, more work, 3, I get to learn a lot more. So I would go to his apartment every week. Just, if he has something, he's like, yeah, just do this. Or like, hey, we have a session into mix. Can you prepare my sessions? So I would prepare all the mix sessions. I prepare it. He would check it, and then he would start mixing it after. So he doesn't have to think about too many things. He didn't have to like sit there for an hour just to make sure the session is clean. So I did that for about 3 or 4 years. But on the side, I still work for like a couple friends. Actually, another fellow Malaysians that just moved back to Malaysia 3 years ago. His name is Rozan. He also took me on as a mentor. But that's a little bit different, because the relationship on there is because he was a musician, and then he was a little bit more on the musician side. So a lot of like the computer side, he will ask my opinion about it. Like, hey, I want to like build this computer. What do you think is the best thing to do? And I love computers. I love playing games as well. I love computer. So essentially, I learned how to build a rig, how to learn how to like assemble, or sort of like I would just build according to what the person needs, type of like equipment and stuff. So that went on for about a couple years until 2016. James, and do you know Steven Dubner? I don't know if you know Steven Dubner.
I've heard of him. Not familiar.
Have you heard of this this radio show called Freakonomics?
Oh, no.
So Freakonomics is a pretty big show. They have like millions of downloads. It's about economy and stuff like that. So they both came to the studio. And then it's weird because I didn't work on the sessions. I just assist on the sessions because they brought in their own engineer. So essentially, they work there, and then they somehow come back again. They're like, want to record another show, the James Altucher Show, and then somehow my manager just put me on it, because at that point, my forte, I mean, I do music, but my forte is more on post production. So I record at that point. I already recorded Mike Myers and Benedict Cumberbatch.
Yeah.
And if you watch Luke Cage, the Netflix show, I recorded that guy as well, Luke Cage. I can't remember what's his name anymore. Mike something. Yeah. And then so a couple big names, and then they like it. And then I've been doing a tons of voiceover, because voiceover bring in a ton of money for the studio, not for me, for the studio. I wish it's for me. But yeah, so he put me on as an engineer, and I started recording the podcast, and I'm like, holy crap, I love this. It's different than music, because I music is set. Music is like, we know what we want. This is the arrangement. This is the music. We know what we do. With podcasts back then, with James, you never know where it's gonna go. I don't know who is James. I didn't know he was a millionaire. I didn't know he is a self-help guru back then. That was 2016. I hardly read. I watch a lot of TV. I read a lot of like tech review and stuff like that, but I don't read books. So yeah, so I'm like, this is great. Just started working for him. So I'm like, I told my student managers, like, hey, this person call again, just put me on the sessions. I love working with him. I like the free flow conversations. I like how I like so-called the podcast. That's the first ever podcast I recorded. I remember the first three guests that James brought on. One is Jesse Itzler. I don't know if you know Jesse Itzler. Jesse Itzler is Sara Blakely's husband. Sara Blakely is the founder of Spanx. You know, you probably would know Spanx. We would know Spanx. Spanx is like the underwear, women underwear. Yeah. So Sara Blakely, and then the second guest was shit. What's her name? Sorry, I cursed a little bit. Arianna Huffington.
Yeah.
That was the second guest. And the third guest is AJ Jacobs. The third guest is actually what hooked me. It's like, okay, I want to work for him for longer than this.
Who's the third guest again?
AJ Jacobs.
AJ Jacobs.
Yeah, AJ Jacobs is a great American writer, American author. He wrote a book called Living Biblically. So what happened is, for a year, he's Jewish. He's Jewish. So for a year, he just lived like how Jewish live. As in, like, if you do anything wrong, he will stone you, like literally stone you, throw stone at you. And then if your wife had period, you can sit on wherever your wife sit on before. So he essentially have to hold the chair, bring his own chair. You know, he want to experiment, and he wanted to feel how it is that like. So he wrote that book, and then that I remember the podcast was all about experiment. So I'm like, this is great. I was an introvert back then. Like, I mean, when I was in high school, I saw you. I saw you shaking your head.
I'm more introvert than you, so you can't say that.
Yeah, you're definitely introvert. But for me, like, as a foreigner, I would call myself an alien, because we are essentially alien in US, like you in New Zealand. Yeah, so I'm an alien. I don't know anyone, and my English is always this great. Like my English wasn't exactly great. In high school. It's my like, if I remember I used to be in a band, right? I used to be in a band with a couple of friends. Man, I can't remember the name. I remember their nickname, but I can't remember their full name. Yeah, Jinlin and Zihan and Eugene. Do you remember them?
I remember Zihan. Jinlin.
Yeah. Jinlin, yeah. He was in a better class than us. He was in the he's yeah. And now he became like a dentist now. He's a dentist, and he's married, has kids now. And then Eugene. Do you remember Eugene? Do you know Eugene?
You mean the girl Eugene?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So we used to be in a band. This is how terrible my English is. They gave a nickname to my English. They called it Junglish, because the way I speak it is so bad. Because my English is so bad, they gave a nickname to my English. Yeah, because I always like say things weirdly. I mean, now I still do. I don't enunciate good enough. Yeah, so I have I have my own language called Junglish, and then so I was self-aware a little bit. So like, I'm self-conscious, not self-aware, self-conscious. So I don't speak a lot. I make some jokes here and there. I will here and there, because essentially that's what I like to do. I like to make jokes, and then after that, I just experiment. I just start talking to strangers out of nowhere, and then like on a plane, if I see someone has an interesting thing, I just start asking about it. I still do it once in a while right now. And that essentially sort of gave me confidence that I can talk to strangers. That's I'm like, that's when I'm like, okay, now I see the value of engineer or work for the James Altucher Show, because I actually learned something myself that I can use to improve myself. So I started working for James. In terms of, this is very part-time. This is so part-time that sometimes I go to other studio that I don't even know that he went to other studio. He recorded some other stuff. And then essentially it became, and then what happened is my studio closed. My boss doesn't want to do it anymore. My boss is like, I want to do photography. Photography is cool, and I make more money that way anyway. So my studio is closing, and then I'm like, crap, what should I do now? And then I remember experiment, right? So I'm like, I just reach out to James. I'm like, hey, the studio that I'm working at is closing. I know you guys like working with the studio. I like working with you guys as well. If you guys, I know the producer doesn't live in New York. The producer live in Texas. Texas then. It's still Texas. Yeah, she's still in Texas. The producer then live in Texas. And she doesn't really know the studio scenes in New York as well as I do. I'm like, hey, I would take care of the studio bookings for you guys. I have a couple connections, sort of, that I know, I can book ourselves. Let me take care of the booking, and I can engineer you. I can engineer your sessions because I like working with you guys. We have like a flow that we are going through. It would be weird if you guys change right now. And producer right back said, yeah, sure, let's do it. So from that point on, I become their sole engineer. Of course, on the side, I still do other things because I engineer for them, but it still wasn't as full-time as right now. Back then, I just handle the engineering stuff. So they will call me up. They're like, hey, we want to book this guest. They're located at this place. Can you find a studio? Then I will find a studio. I have to find their budget, like what are they willing to pay. I have to find a studio that fit their budget and then also fit my budget because, they have to pay me too. So, and then that became like, I became their sole engineer for it. And then as time goes by, as the show grow, James needed more help. So I essentially not only engineer for the show. Every time we engineer the show, I'm like, maybe you guys should take a picture. So I would take a picture for them and send it to the producer so they can promote it. And then after that, I'm like, oh, Bitcoin is a thing now. Maybe you guys should do something for Bitcoin. So I would pitch them the idea, like maybe you should do something on Bitcoin. I need to like it. And then I just help them do the Bitcoin things, as in like record something about Bitcoin. Yeah, and then essentially it's like James is very busy. I'm like, if you need help, I can help scheduling your stuff. I schedule your guests anyway. I schedule your booking anyway. So yeah, sure. And then I became his assistant and engineer. So I became his like if someone email him need something, they will go through me. They will ask me for things, and then I'll talk to him because so I sort of got promotion that way, and then he moved me closer to his apartment. And then pandemic hit. The biggest obstructions that everyone has in life is the pandemic, right? But yeah, so pandemic happened. We have to let go a couple of people, and then I had to step up, and then I became the producer for the show. That's my stories. And then now I'm in Atlanta right now, not in New York anymore.
Wow, that was a great story. What a story! Like how you
Thank you.
started not thinking about your world is this small, and I'm just curious, how did you have that? I don't know what made you like what was the thing that how did you get through that? Like when you say your world is so small and then you want to try something outside, like, what was the transition? How did you transition?
I would say I would first start off how did I limit myself? It's very very dumb. It's very dumb. I think it's very dumb. The reason I limit myself is because I knew my English wasn't great. I knew I can't survive in any other in the Western country. I can survive in China. It's fine. I've been to China.
Yeah.
I've been to Korea.
Yeah.
I can survive there. It's fine.
Yeah.
The Korean but the idea of going to like across the sea,
Yes.
To be in a Western country,
Yes.
English speaking country,
Yes.
it's like I would never in 100 years think that I could do that. I only know about US through movies. I know they're constantly got invaded by alien. And if aliens want to invade the earth, they always go to the States first. They always go to US first. Always New York first.
Right.
That's how I know about New York and US. So I never thought, And then
how did you overcome that? What makes you believe in?
To be honest, right now it's so I didn't overcome that until I get to the States. Like, even though I know I'm gonna fly, I know I have to take care of every bunch of stuff. I mean, my ex-girlfriend is like, hey, my ex-girlfriend is like, hey, if you don't show up, if you don't come to the state with me, you're gonna break up. I'm like, okay, shit. Now I have to find a way to go. So once I got here, I think one thing is that I went to Florida first.
Yeah.
So less culture shock. So Florida and Florida and Malaysia, it's similar in the sense that you have houses like, double-story houses, apartments, stuff like that. And then there's not a lot of people, quiet. And then, people are a little bit more laid back. I didn't get any racism though, which is weird. People are like, oh, people here are racist against other race. I'm like, I haven't get that at all. But yeah, so, and then I didn't really get through that until I landed in the state. Once I landed, I'm like, holy shit, I did it. I was here all alone because I flew alone. I flew alone. I didn't fly with parents or whatever. I managed to like transfer flight without getting lost. I managed to talk to, like, there are some people on a plane. I'm like, oh, you're Malaysian, and then you just sort of stick together for a little bit, and then we changed flight, and then I came to Orlando, Florida, and then I'm like, oh shit, if I can do this, maybe I can do this for a little bit longer. That's how I get through it. That's no way to know if you can get through anything until you're in these situations, I think.
Yeah, I think people value different things. So
I think that's some value in there. I certainly think if I have a kid, if they grow up in the States, or they grow up in Asia in general, or they grow up in a Western country, at some point they should fly across the sea and live in the other continent for a little bit. Like you say, people value different things, right? So my perspective changed so much since I came here, and it didn't change just to fit in. It changed for the better in terms of like, I choose the best from my teaching back in Asia, my perspective back in Asia or Malaysia, and combine it with the perspective that I find the best perspective that I found here, combine them together and became like my own perspective. Like, we see things way differently than people that seeing things here and seeing things back home.
Definitely. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. I think
I think I have the same experience. Yeah. And there was a very deep and deep sharing, I believe.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
And very vulnerable. Thanks for sharing that. I think that I definitely, I do feel that there's more to this conversation. It's like we can just go on and go on and go on.
Yeah, for sure.
And
it's 18 years since we last see each other. And then I remember you reached out to me when I was in New York too. Like, I
can't remember
when you asked about the music stuff. I was in New York. I remember, because I'm like, oh, Sheng Wei reached out to me.
Oh, I couldn't remember actually.
That was a couple years ago.
Okay.
Yeah.
I was talking to different people.
Yeah, because I don't remember if you reached out to me on Facebook or in LinkedIn. Some of this, I'm like, oh, Sheng Wei, hi.
Yeah. But anyway, thanks for today. I believe
Thank
that
you
if
so much for having me.
we can always continue this conversation.
Yeah,
I believe that there might be a part 2, part 3, part 4.
I'm up
Moving
for it.
and
Yeah.
and I see that you have a podcast movement. What's that podcast movement, Dallas? Is that
Oh,
a
so
podcast or a physical event
it's
coming up?
a physical event. It's like a
Okay.
conference. It's called Podcast Movement. If you're in
Okay.
the state, you should go. So what Podcast Movements did is it brings all the podcasters together.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, Obviously you have to pay tickets. You have to buy. It's like a regular conference. You have to buy to go, to pay to go.
Yep.
But it's great. You learn a lot of things. You learn how to grow your podcast.
Yep.
You learn how to start your podcast. You learn how to take your podcast to the next level. And I'm speaking there in a couple of weeks. Actually, I still have to finish writing my deck, but I'm speaking on tech productions 101. So like how to make sure, like I said in the beginning, like how to make sure your production's going well, and how to make sure you have you have a smooth recording sessions and a smooth experience. And also, how do you plan for the next big productions if you need to? So it's pretty much basic. Yeah. Well, because I just love talking productions and audio all the time. I love sharing what I learn. Yeah. It's so much fun.
You're so passionate about
It's like
that.
puzzle. Yeah. Thank you.
So if anyone here listening is interested or and is in Dallas, or is it in Dallas?
Yeah, Dallas,
go to
Texas.
this event.
Yeah. I think that they're still selling tickets right now. Yeah.
Right. So thanks for today, Jay.
Thank you.
Grateful to talk to you. So
Thank you. Same.
Is there anything else you want to say to anyone who are passionate about becoming a tech producer or audio engineer in the future, like someone maybe from
just
younger.
do a bunch of experiment. Just break a bunch of computers. Eventually, you will get there.
Do a bunch of experiments. Just do
Yeah,
the work.
and break a